Sometimes, the most powerful emotions are not expressed through grand speeches or dramatic confessions. Sometimes, all it takes is one simple sentence, delivered at exactly the right moment, to send the entire entertainment world into a gentle frenzy. And this time, that sentence came from Chen Zheyuan, directed at none other than Li Qin, just as she stood at the peak of yet another career milestone. At first glance, it was simply another award moment, a talented actress receiving recognition for her hard work. Yet, for many viewers, this particular moment carried a weight that extended far beyond the trophy itself. Awards come and go in the entertainment industry, but certain moments leave a lasting emotional imprint, and this was undeniably one of them. Li Qin's achievement symbolized years of quiet perseverance, careful choices, and emotional discipline in an industry that rarely slows down. What elevated the moment, however, was the atmosphere surrounding it, an unspoken sense that her success was not only celebrated by audiences and critics, but also deeply acknowledged by someone who understood the journey behind the scenes. This was not a victory framed by spectacle or exaggeration. Instead, it felt intimate, grounded, and authentic. The award became less about public validation and more about personal recognition. Viewers sensed that this milestone represented a turning point, not only in her career, but in how her growth was being perceived by those closest to her professional world. In that sense, the moment transcended ceremony. It became a quiet affirmation of effort, resilience, and unseen support. The kind that does not demand attention, yet resonates long after the applause fades. In an industry saturated with polished statements and carefully crafted public relations language, simplicity can feel unexpectedly powerful. Chen Zheyuan's congratulatory message stood out precisely because it lacked excess. There were no dramatic flourishes, no elaborate praise, just a few sincere words delivered at the right moment. For audiences familiar with his reserved nature, this brevity carried unusual significance. He is known for keeping his personal thoughts private, rarely engaging in public expressions of admiration. That context transformed a single sentence into something far more meaningful than it appeared on the surface. What viewers responded to was not the content alone, but the intention behind it. The message felt instinctive rather than strategic, personal rather than performative. It suggested a level of attentiveness that goes beyond professional courtesy, an awareness of effort, pressure, and emotional investment that only comes from genuine respect. In many ways, that sentence resonated because it mirrored how people often express pride in real life. Quietly, without announcement, without seeking validation. It reminded audiences that sometimes the most profound recognition is not loud applause, but the calm assurance that someone truly sees your worth. Li Qin's reply carried a subtle strength of its own. Instead of offering a conventional, impersonal response, she chose words that reflected gratitude on a deeper level. Her tone was calm, warm, and, notably, sincere, acknowledging not only the congratulations, but the emotional presence behind them. This response reinforced her public image as someone who values connection over performance. It did not escalate speculation, nor did it close the door on interpretation. Instead, it struck a careful balance between openness and restraint, allowing emotion to exist without being overstated. Viewers were particularly drawn to the composure she displayed. In moments of success, it is easy to focus inward, yet her reply suggested an awareness of shared experience. It felt less like a public exchange and more like a quiet acknowledgement between two people who understand each other's professional paths. That sense of mutual respect added depth to the interaction. It showed that success, when handled with humility, becomes more meaningful, not only as personal achievement, but as something that strengthens bonds rather than overshadows them. For many, this graceful response was just as moving as the congratulations themselves. As the exchange circulated online, fans began to engage in thoughtful interpretation rather than impulsive reaction. Instead of focusing solely on the surface interaction, many revisited previous interviews, public appearances, and behind-the-scenes moments, searching for context rather than conclusions. What emerged was not a single dramatic revelation, but a pattern of subtle consistency, attentive listening, respectful body language, moments of quiet support that had once seemed ordinary now carried new meaning. Fans did not claim certainty. Instead, they embraced possibility. This type of engagement reflects a more mature form of fandom, one rooted in observation rather than assumption. The conversation shifted from sensationalism to analysis, from rumours to emotional nuance. Viewers discussed dynamics rather than declarations, tone rather than titles. In doing so, fans became co-narrators of the story, piecing together fragments with care. The excitement did not stem from the promise of confirmation, but from the emotional resonance of the interaction itself. It was this collective curiosity, restrained yet deeply invested, that kept the discussion alive and respectful. Following the moment, fans expressed their emotions not through demands or speculation, but through creativity. Carefully edited videos, thoughtfully arranged photo compilations, and gentle musical tributes began appearing across platforms, each reflecting admiration rather than expectation. What stood out was the tone of these creations. They did not insist on labels or outcomes. Instead, they celebrated atmosphere, a look, a gesture, a shared moment of understanding. The content focused on warmth, mutual respect, and emotional balance. This wave of creativity revealed something important about the audience's emotional response. Fans were not chasing drama, they were preserving a feeling. In a fast-moving digital environment, these creative efforts acted as a way to slow the moment down, to appreciate its subtlety rather than consume it quickly. Through this lens, fan energy became an extension of the original interaction, gentle, thoughtful, and emotionally grounded. It demonstrated how meaningful moments inspire not noise, but reflection, allowing appreciation to take creative form rather than turning into pressure or speculation. While romantic interpretation is inevitable, the deeper appeal of this moment lies elsewhere. At its core, this is a story about mutual growth. Two individuals navigating demanding careers while maintaining respect for each other's progress. Li Qin's award symbolized evolution, not arrival. It marked a stage in an ongoing journey, one shaped by discipline and emotional maturity. Chen Zheyuan's response, in turn, reflected recognition of that journey, rather than ownership of the moment. This dynamic resonated strongly with viewers because it mirrors healthy relationships of all kinds. Support without control, pride without possession, presence without intrusion. Whether viewed as colleagues, friends, or something undefined, their interaction modelled a form of connection grounded in balance. For many, that was the most inspiring element. It suggested that success does not isolate people, and that acknowledgement does not need to be loud to be sincere. In an industry often driven by competition, this moment quietly highlighted the power of shared respect and parallel growth. If you enjoyed this warm and thoughtful story from the world of Chinese entertainment, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to LVT-SHOWBIZ, and turn on notifications so you never miss our latest updates. Thank you for watching, for sharing your thoughts, and for being part of our growing community. We look forward to exploring more unforgettable moments with you, right here on LVT-SHOWBIZ.